Hi, my name is James with British Customs. Today we'll be installing our 2-into-1 low system on this 2022 Triumph Street Twin with our GP exhaust and our 3.5 Predator carbon. To start, we need to pull the seat off so we can pull the tank back and access our O2 sensors. So take the seat off. Before we slide our tank back, we want to remove our battery negative terminal. Always remove the battery negative terminal first using a 10mm socket. And then you can remove the positive side. For this job, we don't need to remove the whole battery, so we just need to remove the negative. Now with our 10mm wrench, 8mm socket, take this bolt out. Now we're going to move the tank back. You want to protect your stuff over here, so either some rags, a block of wood, or something, just to rest the tank on. Slide it back. Okay. Next, we want to remove this wire keeper here. Use our T30 bit. All right, now to remove the O2 sensor, if we get this white plug, push it out of the clip there. So you have a little room to work. You have on top of your O2 sensor wire, which you can tell it's that one. If you just pull on that and it wiggles, you know you're getting the right one. If you push in, you can pull that up. And then you have another clip under here. You just want to push that up and unplug that. Now we can pull that out that way. You don't want to try and leave this plugged in and pull your pipe down and pull the O2 sensor out like that, because you can really damage the O2 sensor by twisting the wires up like that, and then you have to twist it back to put it into the new pipe. You really want to unplug it so you can put it in, take it out properly. So now we'll go to the left side of the bike. Again, with our T30, I'm going to take those two screws out. Just let that hang right there. Now we want to get these two clips that hold our clutch cable on. If you just give them a good squeeze, they come out. Sometimes you get lucky, they come right out, and other times they give you a real hard time, and you may even break one, so you may just have to go down to the local Triumph dealer and just order another one. Like this one. There we go. Now we could pull this back piece out, just like the other side. If we get this one out of the way, you can now see our O2 sensor plug right there. So again, we want to go over here and push in on that tab so we can lift it out. And then we pull up on this tab. Pull that out. Okay. Now we want to remove this heat shield. Use your 5mm Allen hex bit. It sometimes helps if you have a ball Allen. Makes it a little easier to get in there. Now we got to remove, we don't have to remove, just loosen this clamp with our 10mm wrench. Just start turning it. We don't have a good swing on it here, so it takes a quarter turn at a time. Not a good angle either. Probably be enough. So now we need to take these flange nuts off. They're a 12mm socket. So now you just want to pull it out. Now you just want to remove your old exhaust gasket and stick a rag or something in there just to make sure nothing falls in there until we get our exhaust on. Now we're going to remove the muffler section. I'm going to put a 12mm wrench in the back, 12mm socket. And we have our 10mm on the clamp here. Now using your 12mm wrench, put some pressure down on the foot peg here to keep the bolt inside from moving. Really helps if you have a ratcheting wrench for this. Makes it a little easier. Pull your foot peg out. Now you want to just turn it so you can get it out of there. A couple wiggles, take it right out. Using our 5mm Allen hex bit. Now with a 10mm wrench, I'm going to just loosen this clamp. It should be pretty loose. Now with our 12mm deep socket, I'll remove the exhaust flange bolt. Nuts. Now we can just pull it outward. That's it. Now you want to take out your old gasket. We do not recommend reusing these gaskets. You always want to put a new exhaust gasket in. Stuff a rag in there for now. Now we want to remove this bolt here. Using our 12 millimeter open end wrench, you can get it up back there. And 12 millimeter socket. With our 10 millimeter socket, we can take off this clamp or just loosen it. You don't have to take it all the way off. Now using our 12 millimeter wrench, I'm going to loosen this nut. I'm going to put pressure on the foot peg here to keep that bolt from spinning. If you don't put pressure, you can see the bolt just spins around. You'll be there all day trying to loosen that. Put some pressure on it and it tightens up. Pull the foot peg out. Now we just turn that in, pull it out. So now we're going to get this rectifier out of the way. Use our 8 millimeter socket and take these screws from the bracket off. Now this one, right here. So now to remove the rectifier, you just want to push down on this tab here and push down on the rectifier. Do the same on the other side. And this just gives us more access to do what we need to do. So now we're going to remove the top radiator mount bolt. It's an 8 millimeter socket. So now we have this T30 torque screw in there that has this cover there. We want to get that out of the way, which again will just give us better access where we have to go. Okay. So now with your 14 millimeter open end wrench, you slide in from the top. You can get to the nut inside there. So with our 14 millimeter wrench holding that nut in the back, we have an 8 millimeter Allen bolt here. I'm using an impact. You don't really have to. It's not crazy tight. So now we want to come in from this side. You want to make sure you come out in front of your brake line. Don't come in the back of the brake line because you won't be able to get to the angle of the bolt without really prying hard on the brake line. So you just push it in slightly there and you can get right to your bolt. Then we have our 8 millimeter Allen. I like using an impact gun. This is nice and handy, 3/8 drive, Milwaukee. It's a brushless impact gun. And what this is good for is because you're not swinging around and you won't hit the tank or anything. But don't use this for install. This is only for removal. Come on, baby. Okay. So now we want to remove the side cover. Just pull it out. It's held in with some rubber grommets. So now we want to unplug the side stand switch. Got that little tab right there. If you're like me and you don't have nice long nails, you got to use a little something to pry that plug down. So now we want to remove this foot peg bracket. This is our 6mm Allen hex bit. Now we want to remove this screw, which is holding this guide for this wire that goes to our side stand switch. These are T25 Torx. So now we can remove this wire. Kind of push it down. Just lay that there. Next, we're going to remove the engine mount bolt here. We want to also, while we're here, unplug the horn, because that's going to come off with the frame. We're going to use our 17mm open end wrench from the inside here. Grab the nut, and our 16mm socket on the outside. If you haven't already done so, unplug the horn. So now we need to remove these two bolts down here. You don't need a wrench for the backside because that's like a double nut, won't spin. Use your 8mm Allen hex bit. So before we take this bolt all the way out, you want to make sure you're holding the frame rail up so it doesn't drop. You also want to have a shop rag, a cloth or something handy. So as you come down, you want to make sure you don't just drop it down because you have wires that are attached in the back here, attached to the fan. So you just want to bring it down and put a little rag in there to keep that from getting scratched up. And just let it hang out right there. All right, now we're going to remove the engine mount on the right side. Put our 17mm in there, 16mm. So now we need to remove this bolt here. Got an 8mm Allen hex bit and a 14mm nut in the back. Now as you take this apart, you want to leave the bolt through there so that the frame section doesn't fall down. Now while you're holding the frame, you can pull the bolt down. So this right side is going to come off all the way. There's a little grommet under here that's holding the radiator up. So you just got to pull it down from there and then you can pull it out. So now we need to remove these two bolts here. It's a 12mm socket. Want to hold the cat and you take this one out. So now to remove the cat bracket, we've got 3 bolts right here and here. 12mm socket. Okay. So now we can start putting our frame rails back on. Start with these 2 screws in the back. As we're putting this into the front, you got the little grommet, and this piece goes up into it. You want to make sure that those are lined up right as you go in. Just throw that bolt in there, and now you can let go of it. So now, when we're putting this bolt in, it's easiest to start by getting the nut in the back so you can hold it in place and then thread the screw through. So now that's on there. Now we're going to put this nut here. We're just putting everything on loose at first, and once all the bolts are in place, we can tighten everything down. Now we can put our double nut back in. The flat portion is going to go up against the frame. It helps to push one of the bolts out. Just start the one with your 8mm Allen wrench socket. Screw the other one in. So now we can put the right side frame rail up. I'm going to make sure you're getting your pin and your grommet aligned properly. Okay, so in the back and in the top, they go to the inside of the frame. You also want to just take care that you're not pinching any wires as you put this stuff back together. I'm just going to put that there temporarily while I put this one in. Just get the nut on the back side of that. I can come back here, throw that screw in, put the nut on the back. So now we want to get this nut back here. Just get it lined up so we can get our screw in. Okay, we're going to start tightening this nut here. We're going to get our 14 millimeter open end, get it on the nut. With our 8 millimeter Allen. Start tightening that up. I'm going to go to 40 Newton meters on this. Now we're going to do this one here, a 14 millimeter, 8 millimeter Allen. .40 Newton meters. And we'll do this one in the middle here, a 17 millimeter wrench and a 16 millimeter socket. This goes to 105 Newton meters. Go do the other side. So now we're going to tighten this one up here. Our 14 millimeter wrench. Our 8 millimeter Allen. .40 Newton meters. I'm going to tighten these two up. We don't need a wrench on the back, just need our 8 millimeter Allen. And torque them down to 40 Newton meters. I'm going to tighten down that engine bolt. Our 17 millimeter on the nut. 16 millimeter on the bolt. Go to 105 Newton meters. So now we're going to run our side stand switch back up. We got the wire coming in up here. You got this little channel that we pulled it out of. I'm going to push it back into. I'm going to plug it back in. Right there. That's it. So we can put our wire guide back on. Just spiral it through into place. So a T25. Put our foot peg back on. A 6mm Allen. Tighten these to 25 Newton meters. So now we can plug our horn back in. Now we're going to put the rectifier back in. Can only go one way. Now we can put our screws in. Your 8mm socket. Start tightening that up. Go to the other side. Put this screw in. It's your 8mm socket. That one tight. Stick this bolt in here. Your 8mm socket. Tighten it up. So now we're going to put our O2 sensor into the pipe. We're going to put some anti-seize on the threads. And this is important because, for one, when you're dealing with stainless steel, a lot of times the threads can gall up and just lock up on you. And the other thing is you want to be able to take this out in the future. So this keeps it from the carbon buildup and everything in there. It'll keep it from seizing up, and you can get it out easily. Using your 17mm wrench, try and tighten it down as much as you can by hand. Hopefully all the way would be great. And then just snug it down with the wrench. So on the other pipe, we're going to do the same thing. A little anti-seize. Be careful not to get the anti-seize on the sensor itself. You only want it on the threads. Screw it down all the way. Snug it up. It's 17mm. So before you put this pipe on the bike, you want to make sure that everything slides together, because if they don't, then you need to contact us immediately, and you don't want to be halfway putting it on the bike, seeing if these things fit, because this should all be fit before it ships out, and if one made it past somehow, we need to know about it and make it right. So now we're going to put our exhaust gaskets in, and a lot of people wonder, how do you keep the exhaust gasket in, because they're kind of a loose fit in there and they just want to fall out. So what you could do is just put a couple little dots of grease. When we talk about grease, we're not talking about just a lubricant. We want a thick grease that's going to make it stick. If you just put like an oil on there, it's just going to fall right back out. You don't need a lot, just a couple little dabs to hold it in place till you get the exhaust in there. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. A couple dots of grease. she stays in place. So with our new exhaust gasket in place, we're going to slide our right side header in. You know it's your right side with the O2 sensor facing inward, and it's going to go under the bike that way. Watch this isn't scratching up your frame as you go in. Put that in. Slide that in place. And get our upper right. And now our lower right goes on the bottom. Helps to have it the right way. Slide them over. Notch slides right over the O2 sensor. Put our nuts on, just nice and loose. We'll tighten them later. Now we want to remove this clutch cable bracket with our 8mm socket. And just leave that loose for now. So now we can install our crossover into our collector. You have your two tangs here, should be on the outside, but your one in the back should be facing up. Put this one into the top, and those should be aligned. You can align them later, but get them close. With your kickstand down, you can slide it across. If you don't have your kickstand down, you're going to run into problems. Okay. Now we can put the left side head pipe in. We have our gasket in place. I'm going to start into the collector and then come over and guide it into the head. It should look somewhat like this. So now we can put our flanges on. Got your upper left, your lower left. Slide them on. Put the nuts on loosely for now. So we want to start by installing our rubber bushing. And now we want to install the top hat spacer from this side to the inside of the bike. You don't want to do it backwards because this spacer is thicker, and the thickness there keeps our tab from hitting the hanger here. If you put the thinner side there, it's going to want to push the pipe awkwardly. So now you can start sliding it on. Throw our spacer in there. So now we're going to install the foot peg. This is the one on the left side. We're going to reuse the stock bolt here. Make sure your pin is aligned with the hole. Put your nut on the back. So while putting pressure on the foot peg, you can start tightening up the nut with your 12mm wrench. If you don't put enough pressure on the foot peg, the bolt will start spinning. And if you can't get the bolt to start spinning, then you might have to disassemble the foot peg so you can get an Allen wrench in there. Okay, now we want to start installing our springs. You don't need any fancy spring tools. You can just use a generic kind of hook tool. It'll work just fine. So if you're doing the Predator carbon, same steps apply. We're going to stick the bushing in. Do the top hat spacer from the inside. Put our other spacer on the outside. Get our foot peg with the stock bolt. Make sure your pin is aligned with the hole. Put that in. Put your nut on. With your 12mm wrench. Apply pressure to the foot peg. Keep that bolt from spinning. Get the spring on. Again, do not use pliers for this. Just any hook tool will work. Now we can put the upper spring here. And as I mentioned, you can use just a generic hook tool of any sorts, but what you don't want to use is pliers because it's pretty dangerous. You can shoot these things, take someone's eye out. You don't want to do that. Okay, put this one on. And now we need to put our clutch cable bracket back on. And we're going to reinstall it with these spacers behind it to keep it off of the exhaust a little bit. When you do this, there's two different length bolts. The longer one goes in the front and the shorter one goes in the back. Don't want to mess that up. So put the longer one in, I'll put the spacer on it, and slide it in. And I can take the short one, put the spacer on it, slide it. My 8mm wrench, ratchet, tighten it up. So now we're going to torque down our exhaust flange bolts using our 12mm socket. Go to 19 Newton meters. So we repeat the same for the left side. 12mm. 19 Newton meters. So after the exhaust is removed, we don't need this longer bolt anymore because the muffler used to take up that space. So we're going to put a shorter bolt in there so it looks better. I'm going to start by removing this clip. Just use a little flathead or a pick. Pry it out gently. You don't want it flying across the room. We can push this pin out. And you want to hold this because you don't want to lose the little ball bearing right in there. Take it apart. You have a little spring in there too that you don't want to lose. If you need to hold them in there in place, you can put a little grease on there. Put the shortest screw on, and then we'll go put this on the bike, and then we can put the foot peg back in. You want to make sure that this notch right here lines up with that hole. You put it in there. Put the shorter bolt in. We're going to use the nut that we took off originally. Put that on. Then using a 6mm Allen and your 12mm socket, tighten it up. All right, you want to make sure your spring is in place there. I'm going to add a little grease to make sure the bearing stays in place. Good idea to lay down a towel below you where you're working in case you drop the bearing. It doesn't bounce across the floor. Make sure this clip is going so the tangs will go around the bracket, not the foot peg. Slide that in, push the pin in, make sure it's working. Get the clip. Now we're going to route our O2 sensor plug. We want to route it up behind the frame, and then it's going to end up over here. This is the plug that they'll plug into in this little bracket that they mount onto. So, pull it up. Okay, so now this slides onto that little tab in there. And then this plug slides back into here. So now we're gonna route the right side up, comes up behind the frame. Comes out here. Plug it back in. Clip that on there. And then we get this back in there. So now we want to put this keeper back on. Screw in. T30. Remember, this is only a plastic piece, so don't go crazy. Go do the other side. So T30. Just tighten that one up. So now we want to slide cable guide here. It should end up so that your brake line ends up right in that pocket there. Then we can slide this back into place. Using our T30, just snug that up a little bit, and we get this screw in, again with the T30. Just want to line up. So now we want to put a clutch cable retainer clip back in place there. And you got another one down lower. Now we can put the side cover on. You just want to line up these three with these three grommets here. And if you're off a little bit, you can actually push these grommets straight through. So you want to be careful. If it's not going in, it's only plastic. Don't push too hard. So before we put the tank forward, you want to make sure your rubber grommets are still in place, because they can just fall off of here. So you want to make sure they're pushed all the way in. There's a little U-channel inside the tank here that has to line up on there. So as you come up on it, you want to make sure it's sliding in there. So now we just want to make sure this hole's lined up. Get our bolt through. Put the nut there. $10mm wrench and our 8mm socket. Tighten that up. I'm going to tighten this to 8 Newton meters. Now we can reconnect our battery negative terminal. Use a number 3 Phillips or a 10mm socket. And then we'll torque it down to 4.5 Newton meters. So now we're going to put the seat on. We have a hook right here that goes underneath the tank, and then these two right here that go into this slot. So you want to be back enough that you can get them in there. Then when you can't lift it up, you know they're in, you just pop down the bottom. So before we fire this up, we want to clean all our fingerprints, any oil, grease that might be on these. Use some alcohol. We use 99% alcohol you can get at the drugstore. And clean it all off, because if you don't, when you get them hot, all that stuff's going to burn in there permanently. So you don't want to see a permanent fingerprint on there. So now you want to start this thing up and let it run for about 12 minutes or until the fans turn on. Make sure it's up to running temperatures. That'll help normalize the O2 sensors to the EFI system for your new exhaust system. We still recommend that you put a download into this at minimum to make it run better. You can get a download from online for Tune ECU type program and just tune it for these pipes. But ultimately, for a full system, I highly recommend that you get it dyno tuned just to really tailor it perfect to this bike for the way it is. So now we're going to fire this up. We recommend that you do this outside because you're going to be running for about 12 minutes. That's enough time to eat up a lot of oxygen in the room. So do a well-ventilated area is what you want.